Sarah took a step back and stared at the items she had on her bed. Let's see here. Hygiene kit? Check. Clothes? Check. Sunday clothes? Check. Flute? Flute. She looked around her room. Her flute case was nowhere to be seen. Now where did it go? I could have sworn I put it here just a few minutes. There it is. Oh, can't forget the music either. She placed the items in the case and zipped it up. Right then, she could hear a knock on the door. Sarah, are you ready to go yet? We're running late. Yes, Mom. She carried her luggage out to the car, passing by her wall decorated with trophies and photos of her marching band experiences. After placing her luggage in the trunk, she closed it and got inside the car. Her mom turned the keys and the car started. They soon got onto the freeway, where they made a turn onto Highway 205. From the highway, Sarah got a good view of Mount Hood and the Cascade Range as it towered above them. As the highway changed from east to north, Sarah rested her hand on her hands, while her elbow supported her against the window. Her mother noticed the long look on her face. Sarah, I know you're upset, and we'd like to plan a day where you can come rafting with us too, but no other date works. I know. There's always next year's trip, and besides, it's not every day you get to go to New York City. You should be excited to compete in the national championships. I am. But I prefer to go whitewater rafting with my friends. Your friends are in band too, aren't they? Yeah. Then you'll be fine. I've been to New York, and you'll have a fun time there. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Fun? Mr. Patrick has been working us all summer. I bet when we get there, the first thing he's going to have us do is rehearse. I haven't done anything exciting, and the one chance I get for an adventure, they decide to hold the championships. It's not the end of the world. There are plenty of adventures out there. As the car pulled up to the airport, she looked at her. In fact, I challenge you to make this trip an adventure. Can you do that? Yeah. Soon they made it to the terminal. The two got out and unloaded the luggage. Now here's your ticket and have fun, okay? I will. Her mother smiled and hugged and kissed her before giving her the ticket. And be safe. Sarah rolled her eyes. The two exchanged waves of goodbye before Sarah watched her mother drive away. She grabbed her suitcase and walked into the terminal. Inside, her classmates were together with their luggage grouped near a ticket counter. A thin man in his mid-20s approached her. He had brown hair and a goatee.
Sarah, you made it.
Hi, Mr. Petrick.
Just go to the others and we'll soon be ready to board.
As she walked past him, her smile quickly disappeared.
You made it!
Cheered Mackenzie. Sarah put on another smile and hugged her.
I don't know about you, but I am stoked.
Feeling so-so about it.
Oh, come on, it's going to be great. Think of it as an adventure.
One problem with that. It's a city.
So?
Cities are noisy, crowded, and personally, looking out a skyscraper window to see the whole place isn't really much of a view. If you want a view, go to Crater Lake or the top of Mount Hood. Mackenzie placed her hands on her hips and raised an eyebrow.
You climbed Mount Hood?
No, but I want to someday.
Alright, everyone's here. Onward with the security check?
Well, what are we waiting for? Let's go!
Liwa Nuva yawned as he got out of bed and looked out the window. The mid-morning light shone through the window, illuminating the room, while the chirping birds filled the air with song. He looked down to see Takanuva still sound asleep and snoring heavily. Liwa smiled at the sound sleep Toa. He silently walked up to him and squatted down. Then he cupped his hands around his mouth, took in a deep breath, and shouted.
Hey, fire spitter, wake up! The sleepover is over!
Ah!
He jolted up to his feet and took a defensive stance. Liwa cracked a smile before falling onto his bed laughing. Realizing there was no trouble, Takanuva's arms limped downwards and his shoulders sunk as he rolled his eyes.
Liwa, don't scare me like that. I thought it was another Rakshi attack.
No Makuta-san's here, fire spitter, just me. So, are you ready for your lesson training?
Takanuva looked at him with surprise.
now? I've only been a Toa for a day.
The sooner the better. Today we'll start the day up High Branch.
He then began to walk out of the hut.
Doing what?
The Toa of Air turned around and smiled.
We're going to tree lunch.
Takanuva had a confused look.
Oh, wait a minute. Isn't it Gakko bird riding?
Liwa nodded.
Meet me up, tree.
He drew out his blades and flew off. Takanuva's expression went from a look of confusion to annoyance.
Great. Just what I need. More flying.
When he went outside, cheerful Matoran were traveling all around, swinging on vines and crossing bridges. Near the center of the village was a stump so large that it housed their koli field, which the Matoran were playing in. He would have gladly joined in, but the new rules he had to follow put a damper on that. He began to make his way to the Goku Bird Air Force. His balancing act along the branches reminded him of his new size. Soon, he was swinging with vines from tree to tree. Occasionally, he had to use another vine to get across. He was almost at the base. All he had to do was swing across, using 3 vines to get there. He grabbed the first vine tightly, counted to 3, and pushed himself off the branch. He swung through the air for a few seconds before letting one hand go to catch the other vine, and then freeing his other hand in preparation for the 3rd vine. When he approached the vine, he accidentally let go too early. He quickly reached out as far as he could, but his fingertips were short by inches. His eyes widened, and he screamed as he plummeted to the ground. He braced his arms in front of him and closed his eyes, waiting for the end. But for several seconds, nothing happened. He slowly opened his eyes and found himself face down and hovering 20 feet above the ground. He looked up and saw Liwa with his right hand grabbing onto a vine and the other holding onto his foot. The Toa of Air stared at him with a flat smile.
You fire spitters certainly have a way of ground bounding.
Takanuva couldn't help but smile awkwardly.
I guess it runs in the family.
Well, come on now. Time to get started going on your air flying. Then maybe you won't ground bound so much.
His mask glowed, and he let go of the vine. The two remained suspended in midair for a moment, before slowly levitating upwards, until they were at level with the Air Force base. Liwa then stuck his hand out and away from the base and created a gust of wind. The force pushed them towards the base until they were far away from the edge. Then he slowly lowered himself until Takanuva could touch the ground and let him go. The Toa of Light quickly got on his feet and then watched his brother gently land like a feather.
So, fire spitter, ready for some air flying?
The question made Takanuva's smile disappear.
Yeah.
He spun around and saw the large bird hovering in the air. It squawked loudly as the rider on it landed the Raahi right in front of him. Takanuva glanced at his brother with an uneasy look.
Liwa, are you sure about this?
Don't worry, fire spitter. You'll quick learn this.
Takanuva cautiously sat on the Goku bird and grabbed onto the handles. He took a deep breath and gave the bird the order to fly. The bird let out a sharp chirp before taking off. The speed in its takeoff caught the Toa of Light by surprise, and he couldn't help but give a quick scream. The bird flew aimlessly through the trees and above the forest, making him scream even more. He soon recollected himself and took control of the bird and began to steer the creature where he wanted to go. It obeyed and flew up above the trees. Liwa saw them fly overhead, Takanuva yelling ecstatically. He smiled and drew out his air katana. A few quick steps and he used them to launch himself into the air and followed. Takanuva soon settled down. He felt less afraid than when he did as a Matoran. He flew the Raahi left and right, up and down, and even did loops in the air. He then flew higher, almost reaching the clouds. Liwa followed alongside.
See? What did I promise tell you?
This is amazing! I can see the entire island from up here.
Yeah, it's quite a sight view. You should see look at during the sunset.
I'll have to do that.
He then noticed something from the corner of his eye. A small column of black smoke emerged between the Liwahi and Tawahi region. He signaled Liwa and pointed in the direction of the smoke.
Uh-oh. Looks like there's trouble danger. Better go search look this.
Takanuva nodded in agreement. Sarah sat quietly as she waited for the plane. Most of the band chatted amongst each other while she and a few other students were watching a football game. Actually, they were watching. She was focusing on her book. Every time her classmates cheered for the team, she would flinch and give herself an annoyed look. Mackenzie noticed Sarah's behavior.
Why so down?
It's nothing. I'm just not a really big sports person.
Why not?
Sarah shrugged. I guess it's boring. All you do is sit and watch as the ball goes from one end of the field to the other. Even though I suck at them, I prefer to play sports rather than watch them,
You obviously don't know what you're talking about.
said someone behind her. She turned around to see Janet standing right behind her. She wanted so badly to tell her to shut up, but she knew better. Instead, she squinted her eyes at her and turned back around. If there was anyone in the band she hated more than Mr. Petrick, it was Janet. To Sarah, Janet was a snot-nosed brat. She was always telling other members in her section what to do, getting all of the solos, and being rude by texting while the teacher was talking. She was a royal pain in the butt, and the worst part wasn't that she was a flute player too, but that she had to sit next to her in class. After sitting next to her for 2 years now, she just wanted to strangle the little witch and pour water over her and smile as she melted. Her cruel imagination was interrupted when the speaker went on. Attention all passengers. Flight 374 from Portland to New York is ready for boarding. Finally. She grabbed her backpack and walked up to the flight attendant, only to be cut off by Janet. She gave her a dirty look and then handed the flight attendant her ticket and boarded the plane.
Duck!
He threw his pincers towards Tahu. The Toa fire ducked right before they knocked down the Rakshi that snuck up behind him. Tahu stood up and looked around. There were 2 other Rakshi, and Brahatu was battling them alone. He took his swords and charged at them. The Rakshi of Hunger noticed him from the corner of its eye, and redirected his attention to the Toa of Fire. As Tahu got closer, he began to feel weaker. He grunted and fell on his knees exhausted. The black Rakshi towered over him and raised its staff over its head. Before it struck the downed Toa, a gust of wind blew it off its feet and sent it flying into a boulder that jutted out. Tahu turned around to see Liwa and Takanua flying towards him. As the Goku bird landed, the Vorak got back on its feet and made a loud screech. The sound scared the bird, and it began to fly out of control. Takanuva tried to calm the Raahi, but without warning, the bird bucked him off its back. He yelped as he fell, landing on his face. He moaned for a moment before slowly getting back up on his feet, spitting out a mouthful of dirt on his way up. He staggered a bit and wiped the dirt off his mask.
You messed with the wrong Toa.
With staff drawn, he shot a beam of light from its tip. The light paralyzed the suit of armor, and the Karada inside vaporized. Liwa landed right behind him.
You're getting good at fighting Makuta-sons.
Takanuva turned around.
Thanks, Liwa, look out!
Araxia of Poison threw its staff at the Toa of Air. Liwa took a step to the side, spinning part way in his attempt to dodge it, but he wasn't quick enough. The staff scraped the side of his body. He screamed and knelt down in pain.
Liwa!
Takanuva aimed his staff at the green Rakshi and fired a beam of light at it before running to Liwa's aid.
I'm okay.
He placed a hand over his wound.
It's just a tiny small scratch.
While Takanuva helped Liwa, Pahatu and Tahu took care of the last Rakshi. The Gurok stood between the 2 groups of Toa. Sensing an easy victory, Pahatu played around with a rock the size of his head before kicking it right at the Rakshi. What he didn't expect was for the Rakshi to dodge it. The boulder flew right past and headed straight for Liwa.
Look out!
Liwa faced him to see what it was. Then the boulder hit him square in the face. He fell backwards and landed on the ground, out cold. Pahatu gave an uneasy look.
Sorry.
Tahu summoned his element and shot a wall of flame from his swords at the surviving Rakshi and burned the Karada inside to a crisp. Seeing that all 3 Rakshi were defeated, the 2 ran for their fallen brother.
Liwa! Liwa!
Pahatu and Tahu looked over him. His limbs were sprawled out, and a golf ball-sized dent was pressed onto his forehead. Pahatu rubbed the back of his head.
Oh boy, I hope he doesn't remember this.
Out on the airfield, workers prepped incoming and outgoing planes. Over the loud noise of plane engines, no one noticed the swirling vortex forming on the side of a wall. Brutaka's head came out, and he paused with a stunned look as he took in what he was seeing. Airplanes of all sizes were taking off and landing. He smiled with excitement. He then turned his attention to the workers. Their organic appearance was revolting to him, but he found that the great difference in appearance was an added bonus. After all, who would want to befriend such an ugly creature?
The Matoran are in for a surprise. Now who would be the lucky few?
He looked around at the different planes that were preparing to take off. After dismissing the ones that were too big or too small, he singled out one and took note of its markings.
It's perfect.
But it was too early to abduct them, especially with so many people around. He would have to track its movements and take it at night. He pulled his head back to his side, and the portal closed. So he wouldn't forget the markings, he wrote on a stone to his left with his blade. 374.
BJ, I presume?
The pilot nodded.
Captain Roswell.
He smiled, and then extended out his hand. BJ shook his hand warmly and grinned.
Nice to meet you, sir.
The captain was in his 60s, clean-shaven, and stood proudly.
Is this your first time?
The blonde younger pilot smirked.
Flying? No. Commercial airplane? Yes.
The two began to walk down the boarding gate.
So then, what kind of experience do you have, son?
Well, I flew F-22s in Iraq.
Roswell exchanged an impressed look on his face.
Raptors, huh? I was a chopper pilot back in Vietnam.
The two entered the cockpit and sat down. Roswell handed BJ a list.
If you don't mind, could you make sure all these systems are ready to go?
BJ took the list from his hand.
Yes, sir.
Sarah scanned the rows for a decent seat. Slowly, she paced herself down the aisle.
Can you move any slower?
Sarah frowned, but tossed the insult aside. She soon found an empty row a few rows behind the wing. She put her backpack in the luggage compartment and sat down next to the window. She then watched the students pass by her. "Mackenzie, over here!" She placed her hand on the seat next to her, but Mackenzie didn't take the offer.
Thanks, Sarah, but I'm sitting next to Kyle.
Oh. Okay. She looked down and turned her head to the window. Soon the plane was full. While two other band students sat next to her, the class only made up half the passengers. There were businessmen conversing on their cell phones, families, and children chatting as well. After about 15 minutes on board, the speaker went on.
All right, passengers, welcome aboard Flight 374. This is Captain Roswell with my co-pilot BJ. We will be engaged in a non-stop flight from Portland, New York City. We will be taking off in a few minutes, and our flight should last about 6 hours. While we get ready, the flight attendant will go over our safety procedures.
For the next few minutes, the flight attendant showed everything from the life preservers to oxygen masks and where to evacuate. Sarah listened very closely and made note of everything. She felt the plane being pushed backwards before making it to the runway. She held on to her seat tightly and waited for the excitement to begin. The engines began to rev up. She saw the flaps on the back of the wings extend out and downwards. Then there was a sudden acceleration, pushing her into her seat. She looked out the window and saw the airport passing by as the plane built up speed. Then she felt the nose go up. The land below got farther and farther away as the plane rose. Both the towering Cascade Range and the peaks of Adams, Hood, and St. Helens looked small and insignificant from her vantage point. She wondered how easily it would be to just jump out with the parachute and land on the summit of one of them. It would sure beat hiking, but she quickly dismissed it and pulled out a book to read.
Lewa?
When his brother didn't answer, he grabbed his shoulders and shook him.
Lewa?
Lewa let out a moan and opened his eyes. His vision was blurry at first, only blobs of red, yellow, and brown. Soon it cleared up, and he saw the concern in Takanuva's and Taku's face, and the guilt in Pohatu's. The trio stood up and stepped back as Lewa sat up and rubbed his head.
Ugh. What happened?
You blacked out after getting hit in the face with a rock. Sorry.
Lewa rubbed his forehead and felt the indent.
This isn't noticeable, is it?
Tahu folded his arms and raised an eyebrow.
I was scared of that.
Pohatu grabbed his hand and pulled his brother back on his feet.
I'm sure Vakama can fix it.
Takanuva then pointed at Liwa's side.
I'm not sure he can fix that.
Liwa looked down and saw a 6-inch long gash running along his side.
Don't worry, Fire Spitter, it's just a scratch.
Yeah, from a Lee rack.
Tahu's face lit up with surprise, followed quickly by concern.
Brother, we really should take care of that.
Liwa walked past the Toa of Fire with a smile,
I'm fine.
but Tahu could tell that he was lying. Within a few steps, the Toa of Air began to stumble in his walk. He then made an attempt to fly, but within seconds he fell to the ground. His brothers rushed to him. Liwa got on his hands and knees and moaned.
Are you sure you're alright? You don't look that good.
Of course I'm all...
He began to feel lightheaded. Everything he saw began to spin around.
On second thought, maybe you're right, Fire Spitter.
Tahu grabbed him by the shoulder and pulled him up. He then wrapped his arms around his neck and supported him from underneath.
Let's get you to Takoro.
After several miles, Tahu stopped to rest, while Pohatu took his turn assisting Liwa. The Toa of Air moaned as the poison spread throughout his body. He became very weak. His feet were at the point of being dragged on the ground. Soon they were deep within the Tawahi region. Tahu led the way, taking them down a trail. A twig snapped from the distance, and he froze. He raised his hand to signal his brothers to stop. They stood still and looked around. Expecting an attack, Tahu drew his swords and stood in a battle stance.
Come out and face me.
The blades of his swords glowed a fiery red. Instead of a threat, a familiar figure came out from behind a dead tree. That's no way to treat your sister. He lowered his blades.
Gali, what are you doing here?
She folded her arms and leaned her head to the side. I was going to ask you the same thing, brother. He shrugged.
Just the usual.
Tahu, only two things are usual for you. Lava serving and getting yourself into trouble. Tahu squinted his eyes and clutched his fist. He felt as if she had expected what had happened to Liwa. Gali then turned her attention to the Toa of Air. His head was slumped downward and his whole body appeared limp. Matanui, what happened? She rushed to him. Liwa lifted his head for a moment and stared at her.
I got poisoned and hit smacked in the face with a rock.
He put his head back down and moaned. Oh dear, let me help. Before she could touch them, the four Toa heard the distant sound of a rakshi. Their unearthly sound echoed through the forest.
This isn't the best place.
Gali grabbed Liwa's other arm and put it around her neck. As they walked, the terrain soon changed from a dead, charted forest to the rocky volcanic landscape Tahu was familiar with. While the original Takua was destroyed by Rakshi, the Matoran managed to find a decent site to settle a few miles north. He led his team out of a narrow pass and stopped to see the village a few miles downhill. To his relief, nothing had happened to it. He then looked over his shoulder.
How is he?
He seems pretty good. He certainly stopped moaning.
Gali stopped in realization and stared at the Toa of Air. Liwa? All of the Toa then stared at him, waiting for him to answer. There was no response. Liwa! Gali lifted his head up and found him unconscious, and his eyes a sickly green color. We need to hurry! Tahu ran over and picked him up by the legs. Together, they quickly hauled him to the village. The band was energetic, singing the parts they played using only the word da in place of notes. Sarah couldn't help but join in. After a few songs, the band died down and it became quiet, with the exception of the engines. Sarah was back to her book, and the student next to her noticed.
What's she reading?
Sarah broke her concentration from the book and looked at her. She tried to hide her embarrassment. This? Oh, it's just Bear Grylls.
Who?
You know, from Man vs. Wild.
I think I've heard of him. What's the book about?
It's about surviving in the wild. It's good. Might have some problems with it.
Like what?
It's that Bear Grylls has experience in the military. He has the ability to do these things. I'm just a high school teenager. I don't have any physical strength or abilities. If I tried to do some of the things he did, I wouldn't survive. I'd be dead.
So then, why do you have that book?
Because it was the only one I could find. Janet spun around in her seat and put a finger to her lips.
Shh! I'm trying to sleep, so shut up!
Sarah gave her a cold look. Janet then turned back around. Sarah didn't stop staring at her for another few seconds before going back to her book. To be continued.